Welcome to Vintage Vehicle X-Ray. Why the DeLorean Disappeared begins with one of the strangest promises in car history. Here was a stainless steel sports car with gull-wing doors, a rear-mounted engine, and a founder whose name already carried Detroit fame. It looked as if it had come from tomorrow, yet it vanished almost as soon as people learned how to pronounce it. That is why the DeLorean still fascinates people. It did not disappear because nobody noticed it. It disappeared because almost everybody noticed it, and the gap between the dream and the daily reality proved too wide to survive. A car can recover from being odd. It struggles to recover when it is odd, expensive, delayed, and tangled in scandal all at once. The DeLorean mattered because it was never meant to be a side project. John DeLorean had been one of the best-known executives in the American car industry, and when he set out to build his own car, the whole idea carried prestige before the first production body had even been stamped. The company promised a new kind of sports car for a new era, something safer, more durable, and more advanced than many of the machines then filling the roads. It also promised jobs and hope in Northern Ireland, where the factory at Dunmurry was meant to stand as an industrial success during a difficult time. In other words, the DeLorean was asked to be several things at once: a stylish halo car, a symbol of social renewal, and proof that one man's automotive vision could outrun the old giants. People are at the center of that story. John DeLorean himself brought charisma, engineering credibility, and an almost movie-like confidence to the project. Giorgetto Giugiaro gave the car its shape. Lotus engineers, brought into rescue development, helped transform the concept into something that could actually reach production. Workers in Dunmurry built the cars under intense pressure, many of them new to automotive work. Dealers invested in a dream they hoped would bring customers into their showrooms. Buyers placed deposits because they believed they were reserving something rare and exciting. And later, mechanics, owners, and journalists all became part of the DeLorean legend for different reasons. This was not only a machine, it was a gathering point for ambition, faith, anxiety, and disappointment. The car itself made a very strong first impression. Giugiaro's design had sharp, crisp lines, a low nose, a broad windshield, and those unforgettable gull-wing doors that made every arrival feel like a performance. The brushed stainless steel body panels were unlike anything else in the market. They gave the DeLorean a cool, industrial glamour, as though the car had been skinned in some advanced metal from a science fiction set. The body sat on a fiberglass understructure over a steel backbone chassis, and visually the whole machine looked lean, modern, and expensive. Even people who later criticized the car's details often admitted that the basic shape had remarkable presence. It did not look like a warmed-over sports coupe from a large corporation. It looked like a separate idea. The manufacturing story, though, is where the trouble starts to gather. DeLorean's company reached a deal to build the car in Northern Ireland, and a large custom-built factory rose in Dunmurry in the late 1970s. The political meaning of the project was enormous. The plant was supposed to provide jobs and stability in a troubled region, but the car itself was delayed by development problems, budget overruns, and major engineering changes. Lotus was brought in to revise the project, which helped make production possible but also consumed time and money. By the time the first production cars were announced in January of 1981, the business had already been under strain. A young company can survive delays if the finished product and the market are both strong. The DeLorean had neither of those advantages for long. There was one historic moment when the promise seemed almost strong enough to carry everything. When the first production cars began appearing and the public finally saw the stainless steel bodies in real life, the DeLorean looked like a sensation. There was a waiting list. Some buyers paid above sticker. The car seemed to have crossed into that rare territory where a machine becomes a cultural object before it has even proved itself. But that bright moment did not last. Production output soon exceeded actual demand, and the company found itself with growing inventories of unsold cars. In other words, the DeLorean did not disappear because it was unknown. It disappeared because early excitement faded faster than the business could adapt. In real life, the DeLorean was not a useless car. It seated two people, carried luggage in front, and could serve as a striking grand touring coupe for owners who valued style and drama more than razor-edge performance. But real life is exactly where the cracks became harder to ignore. The car cost around $25,000 in the United States, which was serious money in the early 1980s. For that price, buyers expected polish. Instead, early cars developed a reputation for inconsistent quality, awkward panel fit, electrical issues, and doors that needed careful adjustment. Some of those problems improved over time, but first impressions matter terribly for a new car company. A DeLorean could make a glamorous impression in a driveway and still leave an owner grumbling after a few weeks of living with it. Inside, the car told the same two-sided story. The seating position was low and suitably sporty. The view over the hood felt dramatic. The louvered rear window, the broad console, and the simple instrument cluster all contributed to the sense that you were sitting in something unusual. But the cabin did not fully match the futuristic promise outside. Some switchgear and trim details reminded buyers that this car had been assembled from the realities of limited budgets and hurried problem solving. The doors looked spectacular when open, but they also added complexity. The interior was not terrible. It was simply less magical than the exterior had led many people to expect. That difference between expectation and experience became one of the great quiet enemies of the whole project. The specifications help explain why the DeLorean did not deliver the driving impression many people expected. It used the Peugeot Renault Volvo V6, displacing just under 3 liters and producing about 130 horsepower in American trim. The car was rear-engined and rear-wheel drive, with a 5-speed manual or a 3-speed automatic. On paper, that sounds promising enough. In practice, reviewers and owners often found the performance respectable rather than thrilling. The DeLorean looked quicker than it felt. That is a dangerous mismatch. A car with ordinary styling can survive with ordinary performance if everything else is right. A car with gull-wing doors and a stainless steel body invites people to expect something more dramatic. Comparison makes the problem even clearer. A Chevrolet Corvette looked more conventional, but it offered the kind of performance American buyers already understood. A Porsche might cost more, but it brought an established reputation. Even the Lotus Esprit, though imperfect, looked more focused as a sports car. The DeLorean stood in the middle of these comparisons without winning them. It was more dramatic than a Corvette, but not faster. More unusual than a Porsche, but not more complete. More practical than some exotics, but not inexpensive enough to excuse its flaws. It occupied an awkward place, where the style said one thing, the price said another, and the actual driving experience said something more modest still. The engine story only needs one short explanation here. The V6 in the DeLorean was not a disaster, but it was not the heroic heart many people expected either. It delivered smooth enough power for cruising and everyday driving, but the car's weight and image made that output feel less convincing than it might have in a quieter coupe. In simple terms, the engine was adequate in a car that needed to feel exceptional. Adequate was never going to be enough. There was another practical problem, and it hurt in a very human way. Many of the earliest cars needed post-production correction before reaching buyers, so DeLorean set up quality assurance centers in places such as California, New Jersey, and Michigan to fix faults before delivery. That tells you something important. The company knew the first cars were not consistently ready. Some issues involved body panel fit, alternators, and gull wing door adjustment. By 1982, workmanship had improved, but reputation had already begun slipping away. Worse still, disputes grew between dealers and customers because some dealers resisted warranty work when reimbursement became uncertain. For owners, that meant the glamour of the car could be followed by inconvenience, delay, and the uneasy feeling that the company behind it might not be stable enough to stand fully behind its own product. A small manufacturer can survive one awkward beginning. It struggles when buyers start wondering whether service, parts, and support will still exist a year later. The DeLorean's disappearance was not only financial, it was psychological. Once confidence in ownership began to fade, the whole enterprise looked less like the future and more like a risk nobody wanted to carry. And that change in feeling, from excitement to hesitation, may have done as much damage as headlines, court cases, or balance sheets. Then came the larger business collapse. By the end of 1981, production had outrun sales badly. According to later accounts, the company had built thousands more cars than it had sold. And by early 1982, it was already in severe financial trouble. The British government, which had backed the project heavily because of its employment value, was losing patience. In February of 1982, the company was placed into receivership. In October, just hours before the British government announced the closure of the plant, John DeLorean was arrested in a dramatic drug trafficking sting operation while trying to secure money for the failing company. He was later acquitted on the grounds of entrapment, but by then the damage was beyond repair. When the public already suspects a company is shaky, scandal can turn weakness into disappearance almost overnight. That is the real answer to the title. The DeLorean disappeared because too many problems arrived at the same time. The car was delayed. It was expensive. Its quality was inconsistent. Its performance was less exciting than its appearance. The market softened, interest rates were high, and the American economy weakened. Production outran demand. The company depended heavily on political support and outside money. Then, the founder's arrest shattered whatever confidence remained. None of those factors alone had to be fatal. Together, they were overwhelming. Here is one fact worth remembering. Only around 9,000 DeLoreans were built between early 1981 and late 1982. That number is small enough to make the car feel rare, yet large enough to prove the company had truly tried to become more than a curiosity. And perhaps that is why the DeLorean still stirs feeling. It was not a cynical machine. It was a sincere dream wrapped in stainless steel, built by people who wanted to believe that design, daring, and reputation could carry a new company into history. Older viewers understand how moving that can be. We have all seen visions that were not foolish, only too fragile for the world they entered. The DeLorean did not disappear because it lacked personality. It disappeared because personality is not enough when the money runs short, the product is unfinished, and trust begins to break. Here at Vintage Vehicle X-Ray, That is exactly what we love to explore. We look back at vintage machines to understand how they were built, how they worked, and why they still live in memory long after the factories have gone quiet. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your love of vintage cars. And thank you for helping keep these old stories warm, honest, and alive.